I need a password?
Oh, wait, I think this is Laura's.
Oh, that's Laura's. I guess this is Laura's? Oh, I guess so. Good morning! Good morning. So I'm Adrienne Guillory. I'm one of your co-chairs this year, and this is my co-chair,
Jen Romano.
It's
Good
so
to see
great
you all.
to have you all here. Thank you so much for coming. All right. First, we have to, I guess you want me to use a mic. You do. I see him coming to get me right now.
She's pretty.
Y'all know,
loud.
y'all know me. Y'all know I don't need a microphone. All right. First, we want to thank our sponsors. We cannot do events like this without amazing support from the community and our sponsors. So we want to make sure we thank them. They are all in the exhibitor hall, so please make sure you stop by, say hi, learn everything you can about them. Next, we would like to thank our board. So if everyone on the board will please stand up so everyone can see your faces. These are not scary people, so if you see them in the hallway, please stop by, say hi, introduce yourself. They would love to meet you. For the next couple of slides, let me bring up Sarah Mastro. Sarah. She is the president of the UXPA International Board, so if we can give her a huge round of applause.
This is too, you guys are taller than me. Thanks everyone for coming. We're so excited for this week, and thanks to Jen and Adrienne for what's going to be an amazing event. I just wanted to highlight a little bit about UXPA International before we start. I think we have, how many people in the room are first-time attendees? Woo! How many people, honest, it's okay, how many people had not heard of UXPA International before this year? All right. So just a little bit about you. UXPA International is a all-volunteer-run organization. So we all have our day jobs, and then we love UX, and we love this organization so much that we all volunteer for this organization. Our board members, our chairs, it's all volunteer-run. We do a lot. Our conferences is our big ta-da every year, but we do a lot of things. We do, I'm really loud, but this seems like, yeah, thanks. That's great. Yeah. We do the journal, we do the magazine, UX Magazine, we have webinars, short courses, we do a mentorship program. I don't know how many of you have been involved in our mentorship program before? Okay, all right. We have member discounts, we have a job board, we do a salary survey, we have our conference. So there's a lot going on in the background, and there's a lot of offerings on our website in addition to our conference. So you're going to have an awesome time this week. You're going to say, how can I be more involved with UXPA International? Because this is such a great organization and these are such great people. What can I do? Well, there's a lot you can do. So UX Magazine and the Journal, you can get involved. We're always looking for contributors. We're looking for writers. We're looking for volunteers. Local chapters, Christina, stand up, wave. Find this lady, track her down. She is our director of chapters, and she is going to be the one to help you facilitate that. Webinars and short courses, Joshua, find this guy, or scan. Not sure about what you want to do for the magazine, Andrew. Andrew's your guy. Our salary survey is now live, and thanks to Measuring You. You can scan that QR code, or you can just go to our website. Thank you, Rajesh, who is our treasurer, for pulling that together, and Vicki, who is our director of web. Vicki, can you stand up for a second? Because if you have any ideas of things you'd like to see content-wise, find her. And finally, of course, our international conference. We couldn't do this without a lot of you, of course, chairs and contributors, and Adrienne and Jen will get into that more, but if you are interested in moving forward, then we would love that as well. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a great week.
All right, a little bit about what we're up to this week. We had 171 submissions. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted to this conference. Of those, we have 58 sessions. That's across our pre-conference not pre-conference courses, across our panels, across our talks, everything that's happening over the next 3 days. We had 7 pre-conference courses, thanks to our instructors who joined us yesterday and to everybody who joined us for those pre-conference courses. 13 posters out in the exhibit hall. We have a poster session on Wednesday, but those will be up, so stop by during the week and check out those poster sessions. This is UXPA's 32nd conference. Again, welcome to all of you who are here for the first time. It's a super friendly group, UX practitioners. Make some new friends, some new UX friends. We've got lots of things going on in the exhibit hall this year. Amongst our 7 exhibitors, we have lots of games and things. So, you know, even if you don't know people, it's hopefully going to be easy to meet people. Make some friends, talk to people. I promise you it's a friendly bunch. And yeah, we have 90 speakers across all of our presentations and 2 receptions. We have an opening reception taking place this evening in the exhibit hall where we'll have karaoke. This has kind of become a thing now for the past few years. We have karaoke at the opening reception. So, you know, during some breaks, maybe practice that song you want to sing during karaoke this evening. I've got mine planned. I won't tell you what it is right now. You'll have to come and join me. The other reception is our closing reception, which will take place on Palm Court, which is not too far from here, just right outside. So hopefully we'll have good weather and we'll be able to close on Thursday outside. Wednesday is a short day, so you can make new friends and go out to dinner and do some other things on Wednesday. We just have those 2 receptions. What else did I want to mention? Anybody who is from South Florida, at the opening reception tonight at 6 p.m., the reception 6 to 8, South Florida folks meet right next to the UXPA booth, so you all get to meet each other from the local chapter. And if you're here from other local chapters and you want to meet people, you could post some notes. You know, we could figure out where to get people to gather. That's a benefit of us being from all over the place. You get to meet people from wherever you are, too. I don't want to, thanks. What else?
Alrighty, so I think I lost track of how many people that I talked to last week who were in the wrong app, okay? So we are using the Ring Central Event app, okay? The icons look the same. I know I have complained. The worst group they could have had was UX professionals trying to use their app. Don't worry, they know. But there's a reason we did that. So this year going into the conference, it was very important to Jen and I to be able to have a virtual element. So there are people online in their spaces. Great to have y'all. And this platform will facilitate that. So the goal was to create something that was almost like being here. So they're hearing what you hear in real time. They'll be able to chat. They'll be able to ask questions. They'll see the posters. They'll even have their own virtual networking session, okay? And then for us, we'll be using the app to kind of navigate, figure out where people are. You can also use it to make connections with people. Any notes or announcements will come through the app. That will come from us as well as the surveys, okay? So Ring Central Events. Everybody got it? All right. For the folks online, if you have any issues with using that, you can just use the help feature. They are very, very responsive. Worst case scenario, you don't get an answer to your question, you can ping me directly through the app, okay? All right, Ring Central Events. All right, next, y'all, this is a volunteer organization. Jen and I are volunteers, the board are volunteers, but at the conference, we have very, very special volunteers. We have conference volunteers, so these are people who just want to help support the madness. So if you are here to support the chaos, please stand up. Thank you. So Matt, if you'll stand up and raise your hand. Matt is the leader of this group, so if you need help with anything, find somebody in this very pretty coral shirt, and they can help you, okay? Thank you. Next, we have the committee members. So if you helped plan this conference, can you please stand up? Committee members? Again, this conference takes a lot of work, so we have all been working on this since, last July? So these people have committed a lot of their time, and they do amazing work, and we could not do it without you. You can learn more about the committee members on uxpa2024.org, and you can connect with them there, okay?
All right, so what is this flamingo doing up here? Yes, we're in Florida. It's kind of like a Florida thing, but we have a game this year. Who was at our Toronto conference? Anyone? Okay, so maybe you remember the Find the Lumberjack game. We had a little lumberjack in Toronto, and we hid him around the conference, and we're doing that with the flamingo. So if you find this little guy or girl or this flamingo, if you find this flamingo, you might see it kind of like poking out. You might only see its head somewhere. Grab it and bring it to the UXPA booth. We have some prizes. So we'll have you take a picture with the flamingo and with your prize, and then we'll hide it again. So throughout the conference, you'll find it. It'll be in our area. You're hopefully not going to find him like down on the beach. It should be like in our conference area. So that's one thing we have going on. Find the flamingo. We have cornhole. We have a giant Connect 4. We've got Legos. We have a photo booth. We have a big map. Where do you live? Go there. Put your little pin in there so we can see where everybody's from. We have a graffiti wall. Go and tag it with something appropriate for this conference. We have a job board on the other side of the graffiti wall. So if you're hiring, print out some job postings and stick it up there. If you didn't print anything and you want to stick your business card up there, if you want a piece of paper and you want to write something, just let us know. But we would love to fill up that job board. I'm sure many of us would love to fill up that job board. Food and drinks, we've got lots of food throughout the entire conference. We heard from some of you about vegan options. We will have vegan options. We are making sure everything is labeled, if things are gluten-free, if things are vegan. If you see something that's not labeled, please let us know so we can get that taken care of. Our receptions are heavy, heavy appetizers. Come hungry and thirsty. And what else? At the hotel, we have spa discounts, and I heard there's lots of openings this week. So, in those breaks and evenings and whatever, if you want to go to the spa, there's a 20% discount. Let them know you're with our group. There's also yoga on tomorrow morning at 7:30, and then not until I think Friday. So if you're into 7:30 yoga on the beach, which is lovely if the weather's good, then yeah, sunrise yoga. And then in the city, we have a pamphlet at the registration desk with some things going on in the city. It's a beautiful place. I know it's super hot, but it is really beautiful. There's a great boardwalk. So, if you want to get out, let us know. Go meet those South Florida folks at the UXPA booth at 6 p.m. and they can tell you more places and more things to do in the city. So hope you all have a great time. And let us know, let Adrian and I know, and obviously the board and all these lovely volunteers if you need anything at all or if anything is confusing or whatever. Oh yeah, so you should have received drink tickets at registration. 4 drink tickets, that's for either reception. And if you are thirsty after you use your 4 drink tickets, there's also a cash bar where you can pay or charge it to your room or ask your new friend for their drink ticket. It's usually some floating around. All right.
All right, so one of the things that we did last year that I loved seeing, and I want to make sure that we continue doing that, is I like seeing pictures on the wall of things that are happening. Our volunteers took great pictures yesterday. So what I would love for you to do is, as you are at the conference, please take pictures. I will post this on the app so you have access to it. Please send us pictures of you just enjoying the conference or something interesting you've seen. For our folks at home, go ahead and send us a picture of your setup and you rocking out at the house. We would love to see it. Make sure you tag it with UXPA 2024 if you post it on any of the social medias. I think that's it. All right. We always like to start the conference with a friendly reminder. As Jen mentioned, this is a very friendly conference. We have a code of conduct. I know we don't have to worry about this group when we say that, but we make sure that we post it anyway. If you have any issues, any concerns, anything makes you feel uncomfortable, please come get us and we'll take care of it, okay?
One more thing, sorry, I forgot. We all need more cowbell. So, you'll be hearing this Right as sessions are about to start. So we've got that little triangle, which is a gentle reminder that sessions are about to start.
Do you still have it? Can you do your bell?
That's the gentle reminder.
That's the gentle reminder.
Yeah, but then
Time
you'll
to-
hear this. So, yeah, just keep your eyes peeled for the cowbell. Your ears peeled.
Okay, so it was funny. People were like, "Are you trying to keep your keynote a secret?" Yes and no, whatever. But I would like to tell you a story. So over spring break, me and my kids. If you saw me last year do the closing keynote, I told you my husband was like, "Get through the conference," right? Well, I can say it now, y'all. I got married. Anyway. So. My husband and I took our boys to the African American Museum up in D.C. And if you've never been there, it is an amazing experience. And on the first floor, the exhibit was talking about futurism. And I had never thought of futurism in that way, okay? I won't give all the details, but it gave me goosebumps. So when we were thinking about the conference, piggybacking on kind of where I ended the keynote last year, I said, I really feel like this group should start to think about where are we going. And I was like, is there such a thing as a UX futurist? There are UX futurists. So we talked to a few, and one in particular, just talking to her gave me goosebumps. And we talked about kind of what our vision is for this talk. So I introduce you to Laura Oliver, our keynote speaker. So as she gets ready, y'all prepare, make sure you're ready to take notes. All of these talks will be recorded, so you'll have access to those in about a month, so you don't have to be too invested in your notes. And then again, if you have any questions whatsoever, please find anybody in the volunteer shirt or Jen and I will be happy to help you. Welcome to the conference.
Good morning. Oh, that was so nice. Thank you, guys. Okay, one more round of applause for all of the organizers, for Jen and Adrian and the board and the volunteers and everyone. You can keep clapping for a second if you want, because I have to log into this computer. Super fun. I can't think and type a password at the same time, you guys. It's not a thing. And I think we can get the slides up on the screen. Excellent. We're already off to a good start. So, how exciting is it to be kicking off UXPA 2024? So, this event is what I would call a permissive space. Over the next couple of days, anything is possible. And it's like, who are you going to talk to? What are you going to learn? It is an amazing opportunity to fill your cup with energy for the present and an opportunity to fill your bag with tools and insights and methods and other things that we'll use in the future. So, today we're going to talk a lot about the future, but first, just how lucky are we to be here together today at the start of this? I'm so excited to be here with you. So we're going to talk about many futures of design and UX and ways in which you can take agency in shaping these things. I'll give you my definition of what is futures thinking. I'm going to tell you why I think you all already are going to make great futurists. We'll do a couple of methods together, and then we'll talk about what's next. How do we use this? Where do we go? Sound like a plan? Good. Okay. So who am I? I'm not a surprise, a mystery. My name is Lauren Oliver. I am a design leader, a storyteller, a futurist. I have had a lot of titles over the years, from copywriter to principal design director. I've worked with big brands. I've worked with global companies. My current and possibly my favorite clients are actually in the U.S. federal government. They are agencies using design to create better customer experiences, to align across silos, to design products and services that people actually want to use, not just they have to use. So I love working with them. Over the past 4 years, it's only been 4 years for me, that I've been incorporating futures thinking and strategic foresight methods into all of my design work. I've pulled together a couple of my favorite resources and I'm going to reference them a couple of times throughout the talk. So if this is something you want to learn more about, happy to share where I did my learning in some of these links. This is probably my favorite thing to talk about, so thank you for being here with me to talk about it today. So that's kind of my background, but let me tell you a little bit more about who I actually am and kind of how futures thinking has already changed the way that I act in the world today. So I've always been interested in food systems. I mean, basically anything that influences how dinner ends up on the plate, whether it's how it's grown or the supply chain or, you know, what are the choices that we have in the grocery store or with Hello Fresh or at a restaurant, that all of those things influence, right? And as I started thinking about the future of food and food systems, I wanted to learn how to be a participant as more than just a consumer. So I bought a pack of seeds. You guys, gardening is now my favorite hobby. It is like my favorite thing to do. So that's one really easy way, is just buying a pack of seeds. My kiddo has absolutely reignited an interest that I have in space, which led to an interest in, well, what's he going to be when he grows up? What's the future of space jobs look like in 10 years? What careers that maybe I didn't know existed 10 years ago are going to be available to him? And that was kind of my gateway drug to all things space economy. Cut to, this guy sits down next to me on a plane wearing a Blue Origin t-shirt. 2 hours later, I have a new best friend. We've been talking about how in less than 10 years, there's going to be space stations. And whether or not we go as space tourists, like, I don't know, but they're going to exist in a way that they haven't before. And I was able to take my kid on a tour with my new friend of the Blue Origin New Glenn rocket factory. And I'm obsessed. So if you guys want to talk more about like space nerd stuff, please, I have no chill. But then at work. So incorporating a range of futures methods into my design methods have really helped me cement not just an expanded range of creativity and inspiration, but I've been able to establish that I'm a person you come to if you want to talk vision, if you want to talk big ideas and long-term strategies, or you need to bring your stakeholders on that journey. Lauren is someone that you want to call. And so that's been really exciting for me. I've been able to insert myself into projects, including one on Gen AI, that I maybe wouldn't have been invited to if I hadn't put myself out there like this. So of course, everyone else is talking like technology, Gen AI, and I'm showing up with like a big futures wheel that you can like spin and it clicks and it's like really fun, right? But I also think a lot about who do I want to design for in the future? And what are those design challenges that we're going to face? So if we're going to go to space, we're going to need to eat, right? So somebody's going to grow food in space, and they're doing really cool things today with like robotics and harvesting. And so it's not inconceivable that maybe someday I'll have a moon garden, and maybe I'll be able to control it from my living room. But I think about, well, what's that going to look like? Is it just going to be a dashboard, or am I going to be able to sing to my cucumbers and like really feel that feeling of like the dirt and the leaves in the same way? I think a lot about the future of work, and one thing I cannot stop tripping over is the future of industrial artisans. I mean, those signals are like everywhere for me right now. And so when I think about a person who's going to build a rocket ship or a submarine or something else really highly technically complex, and they're not going to do it with a mouse, they're going to do it with a blowtorch. What's that interface going to look like? How are we going to design for them? I mean, we're already doing it today, but what's that going to continue to evolve into? And how do we think about that? So all of these things have kind of come together to really change how I want to show up in the world. And I'm hoping to give some of that to you guys today. So what is futures thinking? When I talk about futures thinking, what I mean is a set of methods and mindsets that consider drivers of change over the next 10 years in order to help us think through a range, and word range is going to be really important, a range of scenarios that help us steer how we want to act today. I usually mean about 10 years out as a time horizon. There's some wiggle room there, but that's kind of the time horizon that it takes for change to really take hold, but also for you, as you think through it, to kind of let go of what you anticipate for the next couple of years and really think a little bit further out, beyond what you might think you know. I oftentimes will also use futures thinking and strategic foresight as interchangeable, and they're not. There's some real nuance if you want to dig into that. But futures thinking is definitely not about predicting the future. There are way too many possible futures and ways that things can unfold. It's not about imagining a future that you hope. It's not about imagining a future that you fear. It is really about taking a human-centered approach to imagining this range of possible futures, good, bad, ugly, sideways, upside down, everything in between. It's a really creative and powerful step you can take towards that future. Now, design thinking and futures thinking make great cousins. They're both rooted in that set of methods and mindsets that encourage new ideas, ideation, collaboration, and oftentimes a sense of shared purpose. But while design thinking and service design, all of that converges into a single focus around a specific product and its features or a service, and we're usually building something for, maybe 2 years, maybe 5 years at the outset. In futures thinking, we do have that kind of convergence of signals and trends that are coming together, but then we're diverging to create those multiple possible scenarios of what our future can include. And it's this idea of many possible futures that also stretches your imagination and really fuels your ability to think differently about some of the actions you might want to take today. So here's the good news. As designers, as UX professionals, researchers, product managers, whichever titles you use and prefer, you already have some of the superpowers that futurists need. Creativity, collaboration, and storytelling skills are some of the best things that you're going to bring to that futurist table. So I also say bonus points for optimism. I happen to be an optimist. That is definitely my bias in this scenario. You do not have to be. Sometimes optimism can be an output of futures thinking, but other times it's okay if you're not, because that shadow imagination is also a really useful tool there. So it's okay. It doesn't all have to be this upbeat as I sometimes am. Let me give you a couple of examples of where I see design and futures going hand in hand, things that you already probably do well. So when it comes to research, everyone here already knows how to immerse themselves in the current state and to look for context. Important. Research and futures thinking starts with signals and then expands to trends. So a signal is any kind of a clue to a shift, a new technology, a new policy, a new emerging behavior, right? We're all great at spotting emerging behaviors. Signals can be weak or strong. You may want to try to find them before they're mainstream news, but they can also be really loud along the way. And if you want to gather a lot of signals quickly, you want to diversify the group of people that you're collaborating with, the same way you want to look at diverse groups of users. When you start to synthesize your research, you probably use affinity mapping or other types of frameworks to help you see patterns. In futures thinking, one of my favorites is called a futures wheel, but I also really love a method from Amy Webb called Cypher with a C. That helps me look for things that I've missed and I wouldn't see otherwise. When it comes to ideation, I mentioned a couple times that you're going to imagine multiple scenarios. I will show you a method called For Futures that I think is really kind of core to that. The same way that personas are a really helpful tool in design and UX, you can use future personas when you're thinking about what's going to happen in the future and who you're going to design for. My favorite design methods are all highly collaborative and really fun. And so one of my favorite futurists is Jane McGonigal. She has a PhD in game design, I think, among other things. And yes, I see nods. So if you love methods like that, she's a really accessible futurist to get started with. I'll show you one of her methods today as well, too. And then, much like design, futures creates an opportunity to test ideas and strategies. We don't have to get it right the first time. We absolutely want to test, learn, and iterate. And then prototyping. If you think about it, I think every prototype in design is actually a representation of the future that we've made tangible for today. You can prototype any idea for the future, whether it is a sketch or a storyboard or paper prototype or something that's really clickable and highly refined. In futures thinking, we can do all of that, but also sci-fi and comic books can be really robust prototypes. There's a Arizona State's Threat Casting Lab has some of the best sci-fi prototypes I've ever seen, and they're really immersive and fun. So these are some of my favorite design and future parallels, and if you dig more into some of the futures methodology, I think you could find some more. But let's talk for a quick second about futures methodology. So all of the great futures institutes have methods that they teach that are very robust. I had a bunch of them up on that earlier slide. The service designer in me really likes University of Houston because they have a 12-week method that's very structured and rigorous, and I find that really easy to follow. I mentioned the University of Arizona's Threat Casting Lab that does some of the best scenario writing and sci-fi comic books, which I love as a design output. And then Institute for the Future, which is where also Jane McGonigal is, has some of the more expansive libraries of methods that can be paired together in different ways. So if you use Luma Institute's library of methods in design, I think Institute for the Future is really accessible in that way. But of all the future methods I've looked at, they all tend to have these same 4 common elements: understand, imagine, strategize, and act, which is not entirely different from a double diamond approach that we often use either, but let's break it down just a little. So when it comes to understanding, you'll hear about signals, which are like the building blocks, little clues to the future, that make up trends. And trend is not just like a big observation or a pattern, but a trend should have direction. So we're seeing going from here to here, we're increasing or we're decreasing, or there's some sort of movement and direction that we can identify. And then drivers are kind of like the big rocks. So technology, climate, population, economy, those are more than trends, those are huge drivers. And oftentimes we're seeing trends and drivers intersect in really interesting ways. So I don't think I have to tell you too much about trends in UX, right? Like you guys are seeing those day in and day out. But what I would recommend is sometimes if you write them down, I mean, you know this trick, right? If you visualize it, it helps you think of it in a slightly different lens and way. And so that can be just a foundational element if you want to start thinking about what futures could look like. When it comes to imagining, this is where I'm going to spend a little bit more time with y'all today thinking about how do we do a range of futures and what could that look like. And I hope that that is able to help us kind of all go into the rest of the conference with the aperture wide open for what could be possible and how we want to look at all of the things that we learn and what we're going to use. We're also going to talk at the end about how taking this long view of the futures can open up your ability to imagine differently and what kind of happens in your brain when you do that. Once you've taken that long view, strategizing can become really easy. It's a little bit about checking in with yourself or your organization. What do you want to steer towards? What do you want to steer away from? And then finally, we have to act in order to start shaping that future. So what are the ways we can break that down and decide where we want to go? I actually find it really hard to stay high level when I'm talking about methodology because there's always so much there. So what if we just try something? You guys want to play? I've had up at the top the Menti code, but you can snag the QR code if you haven't opened it up yet. It is a really easy tool to use, and once you're in, jump ahead to slide 10. I know that's a little bit janky, but I wanted to set it up so you guys could actually control your own pace and refer forwards and backwards if you want to. So once you get into it, and if you're in a browser, it's code 98948255. I see a couple of the little thumbs up, so I think you guys are mostly in, but I'll keep that code on the top of the pages. So the first question is really, really easy when you get to this slide. I just want to list 100 facts about the role of a designer today. I've got a couple responses pre-populated because I ran this with my team last week as a dry run, and I thought this would help keep it simple. I also recently ran this with my leadership team, and we used this to think about what we were going to focus on in fiscal year 25. Ooh, I love this. You guys are moving quickly. Can I scroll a little bit? Yes. There's no single definition that is fair. We partner with research. We prioritize. Oh, you are fast, you guys. We understand users. We use different tools. Sometimes we are just viewed as graphic designers. Always we are innovators. We have empathy for the users. Okay, so I'm going to leave this up, and I'm going to ask you guys in Menti to jump to the next question. Well, I'll show you, and then I'll come back. So the next thing you're going to do is flip those facts. I'll go back to the other page so you can see what you have, and I want you to pick three, any three, and state something opposite. So if on this slide we said some things like designers work at all the best companies, maybe over here we're going to talk about designers own all the most successful companies. Don't think too hard. You don't have to like it or not like it. Just flip something that we put over here. What would be the opposite of bringing new topics to the table? How could we flip the idea that we're misunderstood? Being a curator. Designers come up with new ideas. That's what my team came up with last week, too. How could you flip that? Put reality into a new solvable perspective. I'll just go just a little further. Ooh, a bridge between business and development. People pleasers. Oh, I hear you. Okay, so let's look at a couple of the things that you've come up with. We are valued. Design can be used for evil. Oh, the worst companies need designers. So true. Sometimes we are the only one at a big company. Designers are CEOs of all companies. Design isn't about making things pretty. Okay, I'm going to keep scrolling, and I'm going to tell you what the next question is so you can jump ahead and answer it. But what I want you to do is pick any one of those flipped facts and imagine a world where that could be true. Right, so if I started with the fact that design is a highly specialized skill set, maybe I flipped it and I came up with the idea that design is less highly specialized or requires less training. How could that possibly be true? Well, maybe in a future world, design basics are taught in high schools, and most designers learn their specialized skill on the job. Maybe. Actually, we've got, is it UX K through 12 out there? I didn't even know they were going to be here when I wrote that. So I'll stay here for a second so that you guys can pick from these and just think about something that could be different in the future and flip it. How could any of these be true? What world where designers could be taken over AI? Where is there a world where we are expected to know everything? Where is there a world where we own the future narrative and a vision? Again, you don't have to like these or not. I think a lot of people put their phones down. So, okay, so now you've imagined a world where one of these flipped facts could be true. We're not going to run through these all. I want you to think about the one that you just wrote down. How do you feel about it? Is that a future you want to steer towards or away from? And what is one action that you could take to steer towards or away from it? Okay, we're not feeling very powerful yet today. All right. And remember that it can be as simple as buying a pack of seeds, starting a conversation. Just one really small micro thing that you do, maybe even this week, to steer towards or away something that you just imagined. If you want to run towards it, how? Conversations at UXPA, that's a really accessible thing that you can do. Start with research. Research what? What's one thing that you could go Google right now? What's one conversation that you could set up to research? If you want to learn more, take a class in what? The only action I would ask for you right now is think about what is that class and where could you take it? Oh, get an MBA. That's a hard one, guys. You can meet with management. That's a really good one. Start now. Start now what? I'm not going to read them all out. I think what was most important here was that each of you had a chance to think through something really different and then think through an action. And whether or not you landed on something that feels very plausible or something that feels like you could actually act on it, you just did that thing in your brain where you started to imagine differently, and that is one of the steps. You guys just did a futures activity. Easy peasy. Okay, so you're welcome to keep going with that. It's in the app, and by the way, so are images of most of the slides here. I want to move on to another method. So that method was called 100 Ways Anything Can Be Different from Jane McGonigal at Institute for the Future. This method is called 4 Futures. So this is a framework for imagining a range of future scenarios along 4 different paths. It originated with Jim Dater at the University of Hawaii in 1979. So it's been around a while, and it's really core to a lot of what we see in futures. But the concept's pretty easy. So for any trend or an intersection of trends, you're going to imagine 4 different scenarios for how that could play out over the next 10 years. In a growth scenario, that trend is kind of continuing or increasing. It's kind of on the similar trajectory as it is today. In a constraint scenario, that trend is continuing, but there's some force acting upon it, so it's not unrestrained growth. Collapse means that some system or a driver supporting that trend has ceased to function. In a transformation scenario, it might overlap a little bit with the previous 3, but something entirely new emerges. So I'll give you an easy example. Every year, Americans eat more organic food. This is a trend that is slowly increasing. That's the direction. It's currently around 30% in the US. So in a growth scenario, you might think about what it would look like if 50% of all food was organic. From the grocery store to restaurants, right? Perhaps that world exists because the costs have come down or consumer demand has driven it enough that now farmers are able to scale differently or invest differently. And the supply chain challenges have sort of worked themselves out. In a constraint scenario, perhaps the costs have not come down at all, and the supply chain challenges are keeping all of the costs so high that people just really can't afford to eat or grow more organic food. In a collapse scenario, maybe there is some sort of agricultural superbug or invasive species that just makes growing organic food untenable. We have to use the pesticides or some of the other methods. And large portions of farmland just aren't able to produce the same way, so organic food is no longer feasible. And in transformation, well, maybe organic becomes less important. Maybe Gen Z goes all in on homesteading, or we all start eating local and provenance is more important than sort of what labels are applied. That could be, or something entirely new could emerge as the label for where things are grown. I love this 4 futures because it reminds me not to think of change as a straight line. Sometimes it can be a pendulum that swings, other times it can be a spiral that comes back around. There are always new forces of change that are acting upon us, so this is a reminder to not just imagine the one most obvious to you path forward. So you could do 4 futures with any trend in design, and I will talk about that in a moment. But first, I want you to think about these 4 futures of organic food that I just mentioned. If you wanted to steer towards a world where more organic food was available for purchase, what kind of product or service would you design? who would you be designing it for? Would you design a tool to help farmers scale? Or could you design a tool for a consumer who sets themselves a personal goal of eating 50% organic food? What if it was a transformation scenario? If you had an idea and you wanted to steer towards an idea where something else was emerging beyond just the organic label, what products or services do you think you could use to enable that shift? I heard somewhere recently, if you want to have a good idea, have a lot of ideas. And so using the 4 Futures method is one way in which I force myself into different paths of ideation. So there's more than one way to use the 4 Futures. So another version of it is a 2x2. I generally just love 2x2s, but this one's different than I've seen elsewhere. So this one is a framework for imagining future scenarios across 2 intersecting axes. As far as I can tell, it was adapted from Peter Schwartz, who was the lead futurist and really kind of the grandfather of this at Shell and later at Global Business Network, I believe sometime in the 80s. And so essentially, you might here be interested in the future of organic food, but you might want to look specifically at how it intersects with something else, whether that's supply chain or climate change or lab-grown meat or whatever, right? So here, you're going to use one axis for your first trend, and on one side, you're going to have how does it advance, and on the other side, how does it falter. So you would put consumer demand for organic food grows in it advancing, and on the left, we have demand is slowing. And then on the pink line, you might put something around supply chain. So if it's advancing, the just-in-time supply chain is succeeding globally, and if it's faltering, supply chain disruption becomes the norm. So quadrant B is this world where everyone wants organic food all of the time, and a thriving supply chain means they can have it all the time, little to no waste, right? So that's one of your 4 scenarios. You don't have to go with growth, constraint, collapse. You can go with what's in your quadrants. In quadrant C, in the version I just described, you would have a world where organic food is not in demand because, honestly, if you can get fresh produce, you're already luckier than most. So you can see how this might take you in very different directions than the first 4 futures did. And then, of course, we can start to imagine different future personas and products that we could design for those worlds. So by now, you're probably getting a little antsy to think about what about the future of design and UX and all of these things that we do every day. You can also use this to reframe your future. So I mentioned earlier, you want to kind of avoid only thinking about what you hope or what you fear, because that's a little bit too much of your own bias in the system, and we want to help you diversify what you're thinking about possibilities for the future. And because you can't do a 2024 keynote without mentioning Gen AI, here I want to look at the intersection of design and Gen AI. And I'm not going to give you the answers, I'm just going to give you the framework. So one trend that I see happening, and I think this trend actually goes in both directions, design continues to advance as a valued specialty. There are so many more things that we can do and that we're learning as our craft matures across all kinds of organizations. So that's one trend advancing. On the other hand, there is a concern that it is a commodity or an expectation as it falters. And so both of these things might be true, but they're the opposite ends of this trend. And then with Gen AI, there is absolutely a world where it keeps advancing and it reaches all of the promise and potential that we've been hearing about. And there is a world where it can falter. I don't know if you've heard the word slime, but this idea that Gen AI might run out of content to train on and just start training on other generated content and degrade the quality. We already know AI overall suffers from bias. And then there's also the limit of Moore's law, so technology may not be able to keep accelerating if, for example, we can't make NVIDIA chips fast enough, or if the energy required to use all of these chips and all of these data centers, right? So there's a lot of reasons AI may not keep going on the trajectory that it has been. So let's consider that as a possibility. And I think if you could use this 2x2 to imagine the future role of a designer and how it intersects with a progression, you guys could easily think of a whole range of scenarios that could play out. And it can get beyond just, I know there's as many people in the room that love Gen AI as hate it, and that's great. And so let's think about what are the different opportunities and how do we want to steer in any of those scenarios? What are the different actions that you might take beyond some of the things that you're already doing to experiment and learn? Okay, so I've given you guys a lot for your brains already. This is just our first session at this conference. As a creative person, there's one more reason I want you to consider incorporating futures into your practice. In Jane McGonigal's book, Imaginable, she talks about episodic future thinking, which is a practice where you imagine a specific and plausible future, basically creating a future memory. She has a PhD, I do not, so I really do recommend going to read this book for yourself. It is truly one of my favorites. But she goes on for like the majority of a chapter about how when you do this episodic futures thinking, this future memory, 11 different parts of your brain light up. Because your brain has to fill in the gaps around something that hasn't happened yet, and you have to use your imagination in a new way when you're creating these different scenarios. And your brain is so powerful in its ability to learn and reframe and rewire and invent new things. So you can use futures thinking methods to keep your brain active, excuse me, to increase your creativity and keep that as part of your practice to hone that superpower that you have. It can also increase your resilience. So the idea is that when you imagine a future, you are pre-processing an idea. Futurist Peter Skobik calls it advanced cognitive work. I love giving things like a really concrete name like that, advanced cognitive work, so that when any variation of that kind of a future emerges, you recognize it, and you already have an idea of how you feel and how you want to respond. It taps into some of that same pattern recognition that we as designers use, whether it's affinity mapping or building a design system. And of course, it has a much different outcome over the long term. So let's try it together. Last activity. We're not going to use Menti for this one. We are going to imagine that we are here at UXPA 2034. You can close your eyes if you want. You can write things down, however you like to imagine. But start by thinking about, where are we? Remember that you want to keep it plausible. Go ahead and be specific. Are we in a big conference room? Are we in the metaverse? Are we on a space station? How far would you travel in 2034? Who's here with us? Is it all the same people and we're just 10 years older? Is it a different group altogether? Are we here in person, or do we just send our AI assistants and digital twins? Think about yourself. What are you hoping to accomplish in the next 10 years, and how might that change how you show up at this conference? Just imagine the room that you're sitting in, or wherever it is that you are, and hold that in your mind for a minute as 11 parts of your brain light up. Okay, so now that you have that future memory, you can call that back anytime. And I'm going to give you just 2 assignments as you head into the rest of the conference and whatever future it is that you decide to shape. The first, become a signal hunter. Keep your eyes and ears open for clues to the future, different things that can inspire you or could be a hint to any of those other scenarios or trends you might be interested in shaping. And over the next 3 days, I want you to find at least one small action, buying a pack of seeds, starting a conversation, whatever it may be, to take that first step towards your next future. I think you can do it. And I'll see you in 2034, 2025 at lunch. Thank you, guys. I have no idea how much time I have left.
We've got time.
I have time for questions. Okay. I don't get to be in charge of who gets to ask. Imani does.
Great talk. Thank you. I'll admit I'm not the best at this. I guess through 20 years of usability testing, I've become a late adopter more than a futures thinker. But I'm a work in progress. And one thing that came to mind as you were running through those examples, especially the one with the 4 different paths, was I found my mind going back to what historical examples can I think of for each of those 4 paths? And that's when the gears got turning for me, because I was like, okay, if I think about other things that have happened, whatever, how did Blockbuster become Netflix and what's next and things like that, I found it easier then to imagine how current situations, current seeds could grow into bigger things. And I don't know if that's the right way, a bad habit, or what. I was curious for your thoughts.
Okay. About. I don't know how to jam it all into one presentation. I'm so glad you asked that. Well done. Is this still on? Can you still hear me? Okay. Phew. I'm not very loud on my own, so I'm glad. What else?
Hi, Lauren. This is Gurusha.
Louder.
Okay. Hi, is it better?
Yes.
Excellent. Hi, Lauren. This is Gurusha, and we had a lovely time listening to you, and we all were taking notes and being like, okay, how do we become futurist? And then knowing that it's all within us. Thank you so much for your passion that you showed through. My question is that could you tell us an example of how did you spot signals, something that you are predicting to come in the future? So we would love to learn about that.
The question is, how do you spot signals and think about a future? I don't think there's a wrong way. I think one of the things is just as you make observations, write them down. For me, it is being like a very curious person who just reads a lot of things. But a lot of times there are a couple of areas that I focus on that help. So future of food, future of work, and future of space tend to be the 3 that light my brain up the most. So reading anything about any of those things. The other thing that I really like is, I mentioned a driver's wheel. So, and I think that's an Amy Webb thing. There's all of these different drivers of change. So economics, actually there's a great model called STEEP, S-T-E-E-P, social, technological, environmental, economic, political. So just thinking about what are the other drivers and intersections. So for me, when I started learning about future of work, I was thinking a lot about geography. And it wasn't just about whether I was going to be in an office or out of an office and whether or not I wanted to ride the subway anymore. But it was well, everybody on my team is now moved and we're geographically dispersed. And then randomly reading an article about Jackson Hole, where all of these people were moving, and it changed the whole demographic of that town and what rent cost, and so that was something that I kind of filed away for the future to think about. I'm down a rabbit hole. I go down a lot of rabbit holes, and the thing that this is a do what I say, not what I do, but the more you write them down, and the more you can kind of file them away and visualize them, the easier it is to start spotting the patterns. And I think it just becomes a habit or a hobby of being curious. Also, I talk to a lot of people. I don't know if you caught the thing about the airplane. When I had my first conversation with Adrian, I started talking about these artisan workers and welders and submarine builders. And she was like, oh my God, my son just signed up for a welding class. And I was talking to someone else about it, and he was like, did you know my brother is an underwater welder? And so for some reason, if you are interested and curious, the things just kind of multiply. This is where I'm I literally can't avoid signals now that I'm looking for them.
That's excellent.
I hope that helps. That was not a mathematical formula of an answer at all.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
Thank you so much. I really like your passion toward all this, but also this like concept that you've been presenting around like being an agent that helps create the future, rather than a lot of times it feels like the future sometimes just happens to us.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is like from a career perspective and positioning, like what moves have you made to position yourself in a place to be an agent in helping build and create the future?
Yeah. I appreciate that question because I think I thought I was going to start in my design job just selling futures work and that people were just going to start asking for it and buying for it. And they're not. And that's okay because I just started doing it. I just started ninja-ing it in. I tend to run a lot of workshops and collaborative sessions, and so I just kept reading about new methods and trying them. And people were willing to give me the latitude because enough of them worked. So I think just not asking for permission is kind of the biggest change that I've made in my career in a whole in the past 5 years. And it worked with futures the same way it worked with other parts of design. I don't know if I actually answered your question, though.
No, that's perfect. Thank you.
That'll work? Okay.
Hi. Hello. Hi. I was really excited when you started the talk with talking about plants, because I myself am also interested in food systems. And because of that, the example you gave had me thinking a lot about the framework that you're describing here for thinking about perceiving the future. Personally, I'm a researcher in background, so I end up thinking a lot about what are your thoughts, I guess I'd love to hear, on the step before getting into imagining the future, but investigating the framework you're using to perceive the future. What I mean by this is like organic foods, for example, is something a lot of us turn to as like, oh, this is the label I'm looking for to look for good food, supposedly. Mm-hmm. But it's also a commercial label that's being exploited as well in certain ways. So it got me thinking about like, what are the steps going into the Four Futures framework, for example, to interrogate our own biases or understanding of the world, or like what we're looking for, right? Like, what are your thoughts around that?
I think there's a really robust methodology out there, and I think that there are multiple schools of thought on how to do that. This is where I want to defer to like deep expertise that comes out of some of the universities. So I took a class at University of Houston, which is amazing, and they are very rigorous in the here's how you're going to do your research and document it, which is very different than like the 100 ways I think could be different methodology. So I think you're asking a really good question about how do you bring rigor to your research process before you start imagining. I think similar to design, you do have to explore a lot of different paths, and you do have to write it down and look for the evidence of the trends and the drivers and the things like that. When I think about food in particular, I've been thinking about food for a lot of years, and so I was able to look back and realize I had other signals that I hadn't known were signals at the time. So I used to think it was really fun to go to farm-to-table dinners, and there were Meet the Farmer talks, and there was this lady, Amy Hepworth, I think her name was, who was a farmer, who was like, organic apples are stupid. I can grow you better apples if they're not organic, and I don't have to go through all of these steps to get it certified. And it just stuck with me for a lot of years. And then there's an NPR podcast from 2015 about how they came up with the Honeycrisp apple and copyrighted it, and how that changed. In the 80s, you guys, there were 4 kinds of apples in the grocery store. There were 2 reds, a green, and a yellow, and that was it. And now it's better for everybody because there's 20 kinds of apples, but also there's still more Pop-Tarts than apples in the grocery store. So this is kind of where I'm yep, I went down a rabbit hole. I sometimes actually get lost in my rabbit holes of research So that's also where I think having a rigorous framework, and more than one framework, because depending on what you're trying to do, a different framework might help you differently, to write things down, to organize them, to sort them through, and to really decide what's the piece that I want to focus on that I'm then going to take into those 4 futures. So that's a very long way of saying you've got to go really expansive, you've got to converge, and then you can diverge. Thank you for letting me talk that through so I landed on something concise.
Thank you.
Hi, Lauren. My name is Penny Pei over here. I'm a strategist at General Mills, so who said food, we should connect after this. And we have an internal framework for the future also, but there's different scenarios of how the future would be shaped in 10 years. So there's like human-centered, there's efficiency-centered, and there's another centered one. So in terms of searching for clues, and we all know we have confirmation biases. So when you look at clues and then you have determined kind of which kind of the future you will go to, how do you make sure the clues that you're having will actually are the right clues and you're not just being misled into what you believe is true? Can you share some examples of how you examine this, please? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, how excited am I? Because I didn't know about General Mills and that futures framework. So yes. I think like most things, we're all going to have our own bias. And so collaborating with people who don't think like ourselves and don't have the same lived experiences is one of the best ways to mitigate that. And so sometimes that's about sort of the composition of who's on the team and their lived experiences. And sometimes it's about their subject matter expertise. And so why might it matter that you have a data scientist? Why might it matter that you have someone who worked in a grocery store? Why might it matter that you have designers and a mix of different skills and expertise in the room? One of the things I heard recently about consumer packaged goods in particular, which includes cereals and other things that General Mills makes, the US population is not growing at the rate that it was. In fact, it's like Nigeria, Brazil, and India are going to be the 3 most populous in the next 20 years just based on birth rates. And so if you want to increase your profits in the US, you can't just count on more people buying cereal. You have to think really differently about, well, how are we going to be a part of their lives and what's that going to look like as the family changes and as the dinner table changes or the breakfast table as it may be. And so I've gotten really interested in just economics, which is something I'm not good at or trained at all, but what influence population and economics has on the ways in which futures kind of play out. So yeah, finding other people who know more than I do and don't have the same biases. Also, that optimism bias for me comes into play hardcore. I have no idea how much time we have, you guys. If I'm blowing the time, you have to stop me. There's one more up front.
I've got one. You mentioned that your favorite jobs right now are with the federal government.
Yeah.
I'm also a director in a federal government firm. We do a lot of work like that. I wanted to know if you could speak to some of the challenges you have in implementing these frameworks within the government and how you overcome them.
So in my role, a lot of times we don't have the latitude to think 10 years out because the problems are really near term and government is funded by taxpayers who need certain results, and there is different kinds of turnover in the government, not just around election cycles, but other things. And so I think it's not only the look back to look forward, but it's what does looking out get us? How does that color the actions that we want to take today? In many cases, that 10-year horizon is a hard sell in government. We can't think more than 2 to 5. But I can use it for imagination. I can use it to say, guys, we're just going to do this as an art of the possible. We're going to use headlines of the future to set the tone for today, and then we're going to ground it back in reality. I've had a lot of luck with people thinking about what's the demand on the mission going to be, and how is that going to change as technology accelerates, as populations shift, as borders shift, as adversaries accelerate different threats. And so I find a lot of people are really willing to talk about drivers of change, and that's a way to shift the conversation. At the end of the day, though, I think you lose all credibility if you do not come back to meeting people where they are and what are the actions we're going to take today and why. So a lot of times, the big modernization and transformation efforts are expensive, and we need to do them, but we also need quick wins in order to have the license to continue. So this is where my service design brain loves a roadmap. And I always get permission for the 5-year roadmaps, and sometimes I can sneak it out a little bit longer, and sometimes it gets a little bit more condensed. But helping people see, you want to get to X, you've got to invest in Y now, and how do we make it less about playing whack-a-mole with all of the different little quick win initiatives and more about thinking holistically about our roadmap and that now, next, later structure. I could probably talk your ear off on this one, and I think you guys have learned I'm like a talker, so I'll pause there with that sense of like, what's the roadmap and what are the drivers, but we can chat more for sure. I must have blown through my slides if we have this much time for Q&A. Am I talking really fast?
Hey, Lauren, in the back, right here.
Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for this really exciting, interesting stuff. Kind of similar to the last question. So I'm in enterprise healthcare, and we often talk about the slow-moving cruise ship. And so probably similar to the government, we can't necessarily think 10 years ahead. We're already maybe 5-10 years behind. And so I'm curious just about that tension of as you're trying to think for the future, as the future is happening, but you're also trying to catch up to, quote unquote, the future exists, right? So we have things like ChatGPT or Gen AI, if we want to use the buzzword today, that we're concerned, I think, as designers about like the ramification and implications of that new technology, yet we're pushing to use it, yet we're also cautiously optimistic, and so just kind of balancing that tension.
I love tension. I think tension is actually one of the most exciting places to play. And one of the things when it comes to new technology and how we think it through, I see a lot of the technologists just focused on what can we do? Like, let's just like go and make this Gen AI prototype and put it in people's hands and just do this, right? And this is true outside of my futurist self, but I think the designers are the ones that are saying, let's think about this as a system. Like, let's think about the before, during, and after of this tool that exists and people are gonna use, and what does that mean on the system, and how else are people gonna interact with it? So this is another place where I feel like, just, obviously I'm biased, but I think we have superpowers, and I think people need us in the room to help think through that system and that framework. I also think that we should not be the ethicists. I think that's somebody else's job, but I do think we can support what are the guiding principles and what are the values that already exist in this system, and making sure that those values hold true when we're designing that technology and bringing it forward. So I think we've got to be in the room for those conversations. Working very hard to keep myself inserted there. We're not always the first people invited, but I knock on doors and I show up a lot.
Hey, this is less of a question and more of a comment, and maybe you could respond to it. But I find it very refreshing that you're coming from futurism from a humanistic perspective. I think all too often when we see futurists, they're cynical technologists who are talking about how, you know, in the future it's going to be something completely different and uncomfortable, and you're gonna get screwed over and you need to accept it. And they kind of like rub your nose in it. And, or they're just thinking about purely the profit model things. You know, AI will be able to do everything, but they're not thinking about the fact that we have a labor force where everyone needs to work to eat. And until you change that, there's a lot of problems. And you can't be totally just excited about AI taking over everything under that model. So I wonder, if there's an ability for us as designers who are, kind of have a bias toward humanism and things like that, to kind of take the reins and drive it into the optimistic direction that kind of you're talking about.
I think yes, right? That's why I am here, like, teaching you guys. I think we have the superpowers. I think a lot of futurists are involved in the technology and are involved in what are the things that I can bring to market. And I think sometimes I've seen a lot of bias towards like the academic or the philosophical, and not quite enough of the what can I do today to get started, and why does this matter to me? Especially, I think someone else said it earlier, like it feels so like the future just happens to us. And that notion that we can have agency and that we're not just choosing between one path or another, that we're actually going to chart our own course. I think designers are great at that. I like where you're headed.
Hi, Lauren. This is Leah with Measuring You. I've been a UX researcher for quite some time, and I've had the pleasure of working with some futurists, and I have been amazed to find out like what we had talked about 5, even 10 years ago, kind of coming to fruition, even in the last like year or so. So I'm curious, even just for fun, if you could share an example or two of something you've either predicted that's come to fruition or kind of helped mold and shape that's come to fruition in the future.
Ooh, I'm a little jealous of the things that you've touched. I have actually only been doing this for like 4 years. Excuse me. So I don't think I can claim, I don't think there's anything I want to claim specifically. Only that everything we design that actually goes live is maybe an example.
Very fair. Yeah, short term and long term. Thank you.
Ask me again in a few years. Maybe I'll have more.
2034.
I have a question from an online attendee who did not share their name. They ask, how do you use the output since it's not applicable immediately? Or is the intent to innovate and then start building?
I think both. I think when I start asking you questions about, well, what are the tools that we would design today? Who would you design for? What are the things? I think it is very much an act to innovate. The other thing that I personally use the output for is to keep an eye for more signals. Sometimes I think it's called a flag in futures parlance, where you've seen something enough times and now all of a sudden it seems to be at a tipping point and there's something different that's starting to emerge there. I hope that helps. That and just, what do I want to act on? What am I actually going to try or experiment or prototype differently? This has been so many questions. I'm like, are you still interested? What?
Hi, thank you for answering all the questions and this interesting presentation. I was wondering, how do you put rigor into like taking note of the signals, making sense out of them, and trends versus a Bader-Meinhof effect?
Sorry, repeat the last part.
Versus a Bader-Meinhof effect, that once you see it more times, because now you're aware of it.
I still didn't understand. One more time.
So how do you keep the difference between picking up on signals and then logging them, seeing trends, versus a Bader-Meinhof effect that once you see it everywhere, but it's kind of a bias because you have seen it now before?
So the idea that I've been seeing trends and now I see them everywhere?
Yes.
And we're assuming that's a bad thing.
No, I'm saying that sometimes your brain now sees it, but before it didn't, but actually it might have been already there, but now it's kind of the Bader-Meinhof effect, like a bias.
Yeah, I think to me it's similar to like, there are people that are experts on the space and space economies, and I am not an expert on space. I am an enthusiast at best. And so what's really interesting is you're right, all of that stuff is already there, and I'm just very slowly catching up and uncovering it. But I think that's okay in that I maybe look at it in a slightly different lens, and or because I'm an enthusiast, I'm not a professional when it comes to space. That's okay. I don't have to have all of the answers. I'm not designing for space today anyway. But when I think about all of the other things that I am designing for, And why does government care about space? And why should NASA care about the future of work? And I do sometimes get in the room with people that are at Air Force and Space Force and things like that. So I'm at least informed, and I can think about some of those other things in a long view differently. The other thing that I also really like about space as a futurist is most of us, that feels super sci-fi and out there. So when I talk about future of work, everybody feels like they have an answer, and most of their answers are about like today or tomorrow. But when I talk about the future of space work, now all of a sudden people are like, oh, yeah, that's really futurist. Now I'm willing to have this futurist conversation in a different way. So I think it just depends on like where you are in the journey and what it is you're trying to accomplish at that particular moment, how much you need to know versus how much you just need to like provoke.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to think more about that question.
I did have an observation, which is, and kind of a follow-up question on that, which is, I've kind of noticed the future is not evenly distributed.
Yes, I love that quote.
You know, so for example, I live in Dallas. I have a little bit of an interest in urban planning. It's very easy to look at, you know, cities like San Francisco and New York and get an idea of trends and things that we might do. But I guess my question on that is, when you're looking at these other futures in other places, how do you determine what is the most interesting thing to kind of clue in upon that would then drive the rest of the change as a change maker that you're interested in adopting? Because you almost start to look beyond a change that you want to accomplish into methods of accomplishing the change. You sort of almost take it up a level, and it gets a little confusing as you go up the ladder. So kind of wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I think the question becomes most interesting to who? It could just be most interesting to you. It could be, why did you start tackling this particular topic, and what are you trying to accomplish with it? There was an article I read recently on, I think it was in The Atlantic, on Arizona Arizona's gonna have to solve all the hardest problems first, and so therefore it's like the most future, I keep doing that. Therefore it's the most future of the states because it's like the confluence of all the drivers and all of the crises at once, and so that's going to be interesting for us because we're going to learn from either their successes or failures. So I think sometimes in research as designers we have to have that hunt statement. It's like, what are we doing and what are we trying to learn and why? I think you need that in futures too. Yeah. Oh, you guys really put me through the ringer. Those were good questions. Thank you so much for all of your energy and enthusiasm and participating in the mentoring and the Q&A. I love you guys for that. I think it's time for me to turn it back over.
Thank you so much,
Yes.
and thank you for taking all those questions.
Oh my goodness.
That's wonderful.
You are welcome.
All right, folks, well, it's break time. Out in the exhibit area, we'll have some snacks and things going on there for about a half hour, and then we have more sessions. This room, we have breakout sessions, and then at the Atlantic Ballrooms, which is just a little hallway down the corner, Atlantic 1, 2, and 3. Thank you all. Have a great time.